Word. All right, so yeah, let's begin our lecture today of the Uniform Commercial Code. This is always a fun lecture for me. I like this because basically what I do is I take everything that we've learned the last 2 weeks about contract law, and then I start blowing it up. and that's, to some extent, what the UCC does. Now, the UCC is a way to, let me pull something up here. I'll just jump here to the fourth slide. It's an exception. It's a way to say, like, there's general contract law, and that's what you've been learning for the last 2 weeks. And then there are these exceptions. And the exceptions exist when, like you see down in the second block here to the right, contracts for the sale and lease of goods. I'm going to shorten this and just say the sale of goods. Once you have the sale or lease of goods, then instead of looking first to general contract law, you're going to look first to see if, hey, does the UCC kind of mess with me? Does it mess with general contract law? Does it create an exception that would create a different result? Sometimes it will, oftentimes it won't. So you'll just rely on general contract law that you've already learned, the mirror image rule, risk of loss, stuff like that. You'll just kind of look back to general contract law. But like I said, the UCC makes it a little difficult there. Now, to start this off, the UCC applies to the sale of goods. It's that simple. Well, seemingly that simple. Now, what's the sale? What does a sale mean? What's the definition of a sale? It's just passage of title, passage of ownership. Oops. And that, I'm going to leave it at that. Like, we could make this more difficult if we wanted to, but I decided that's not an emphasis in my class. So it's just when you transfer ownership to somebody else, that's a sale. Now, what's more difficult is this idea of like, what are goods? And in your reading, I give examples, and we go over this quite a bit. But the main thing is, a good is something that is tangible and something that's movable. Now, any experts today that want to kind of help me out here for a little bit about something that's tangible? Like just jump in if you're one of the experts today. What does tangible mean? What is a tangible object?
Something you can hold and touch and feel.
Yeah, exactly. So we could contrast this with intangible goods, things like a copyright. I could hold the, kind of a law professor am I? I don't have a book near me, but you can hold a book, but you can't hold the copyright. And those are two different things. And so, yeah, the good is the book. And so I've got lots of goods here next to me. So I've got a stapler, I've got a water bottle. These are all goods. Yeah, question.
So does this also apply to services?
Nope. So yeah, that's another distinction. Goods and services are two separate things. And so the sale of services does not implicate the UCC. Right.
Okay, so UCC only covers tangible goods, not intangible goods or services.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So remember, and with goods itself, it has to be tangible, and the other key here is movable, meaning like an iPad, I've got to be able to pick it up and move it. Now, what are non-movable goods? Well, these are things that are affixed into the ground. Just think of it as like cemented into the ground. You may have so I look out my window from my office and I've got that statue down in the quad of like the two people reading books, kind of in front of the library or whatever. Statue, that's a good. But now it's like cemented down into the ground. No longer a good. All right. And so anyway, I've got some top hat questions here, but we'll wait for those until a little bit later.
Are there hails?
Yeah.
What would a house be considered then?
A house?
Yeah, house.
Yeah. So great question. So this is Kaylee asking, what about a house? What do you think? Can you move it?
No.
Not really. Now some of you, this is where it gets kind of fun, right? Because some of you are like, well, Brother Hales, you had that idiotic comment last week about building a 97-story building in Rexburg, and you could conceivably do that in a year, even though it's never going to happen. And so some of you are like, well, the house isn't movable, but it kind of is. Like if we got a really big crane and lots of crew, and we could lift it up, even with the foundation potentially. Let's leave all those like ridiculous statements just back to the statute of frauds when we were talking about all that ridiculous stuff. Again, thank you, England. We're going to leave that all behind. And today, when we talk about things that are tangible and movable, just use like the reasonable standard. Like, yes, you could move a house, but once it's cemented into the ground, fixed to the ground, then it's no longer good. Now contrast that with a mobile home on wheels that's designed to be able to pick it up and move it around. Well, that we'll call that a good, because it's by its very design, it's movable. And usually here, I've got this fun list of things that I can kind of go through. And normally I'll just pick one of my experts for the day and tell them that they've got to tell me like quickly if it's a good or not. Let's just do this with all of you. And I want you to kind of think real quickly, like figure out for yourself if you've got it. So the first one, tell me if it's a good or not. A textbook that's worth only $15.
Yes.
That's a good.
Yeah,
Good.
that's a good. We don't care how much it's worth. All right, good. What I'm sitting in right now, the Smith Building.
Not a good.
Yeah,
Not a good.
Yeah,
Not a good.
It's stuck in the ground.
Yeah, it's unmovable, I guess.
That's right. All right. All right. This is where it gets a little bit more fun. What about a liger?
What's that?
What's that? I don't know.
All right, a liger is
Lion and tiger.
Yeah, I just figured this out too. It's from Napoleon Dynamite too.
Good.
But yeah, a lion and a tiger have a kid. It's called a liger.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It
That's
has
a good,
right.
right?
So technically,
Yeah, everybody's
I
like,
wouldn't
what the heck? So yeah, technically,
Tangible.
yeah, you can touch it. I don't recommend it, but it's tangible and it's movable. It's got legs and you can pick it up either way. So yes, that is going to be a good. Same with an armadillo or any other animal.
Thinking like a dog.
What about a coral?
What's that?
What about a coral?
A coral?
Yeah.
Like
Some of those are movable.
Oh, so you mean the coral in like the ocean, like the barrier?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question because I guess I could break it off.
It's
But then-
alive. Don't hurt it.
But then Australia will not like you, or Belize, or wherever the coral is. So, yeah.
I'm pretty sure it dies when you break it, so I think it's not technically movable.
Yeah, so the coral reef, I'd say, is not a good. But if you're a horrible person and like start ripping it to pieces, those bits of coral become goods because you can touch it and you can move it. You did move it, you sicko. All right, good. All right, here's a really tough one. I learned Canvas software.
Isn't that a
Not
service
good.
more than a good?
It's tangible. You can touch it.
Yeah. All right. Good questions. This one has been debated for a long time, and it ended up that most courts, and we're not uniform here either. This is the crazy thing. Most
think
courts
we
have said that
access-
software is a good. Now, when we bought when BYU Idaho bought iLearn, we didn't just buy the software. We didn't just buy the ability to use Canvas. We also bought services along with it. So this becomes one of those mixed goods where we bought, and Idaho considers software a good, but we bought goods and services together. So the question becomes, if there's a breach, what do we use, the UCC or do we use general contract law, because it's both service, which uses general contract law, and a good, which uses the UCC. And this will bring, we'll talk about mixed goods and service contracts here in a little bit. But again, I like asking that one because everybody's like, well, you could print out the software code and hold it, and that's tangible. And that's actually kind of what really old judges, well, I shouldn't say that. Judges said when like figuring out whether or not it's a good or a service, they're like, well, you can put it on a CD and I could hold a CD, or back then they're like, you could put it on a floppy disk or something and I can touch that. So we're going to call software good. And that just kind of has stuck. Even though the code itself is intangible, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros. Because you put it and it's transferred on hard drives. And anyway, because of that, they ended up saying it's a good. So again, that's a huge 30-year debate that we don't need to fight about, but just know that. Yeah, and Jeremiah, I love the comment. Like, once I say Liger, everybody's like, good times. All right, questions so far? All right, I'm gonna go back to our slides then. There we go. All right, and kind of jump down to, now you know what a good is. That's important, tangible and movable. Let's talk about merchants. And you need to know what a merchant is because certain transactions involving merchants are going to change things even further. So remember, the UCC applies to the sale of goods. Oh, and I need to stress this right now. That is the rule. The sale of goods, all right, sorry. The UCC applies to the sale of goods. Now, you were like, why are you saying this again and again? Well, you're going to get mixed up later. And on the exam, I've seen this 1,000 times. Yeah, students start saying that the UCC applies to the sale of goods for $500 or more. And that's because they're mixing something up that we introduced last week with the statute of frauds. Don't do that. That's just the statute of frauds applies to the UCC, sorry, to the sale of goods worth $500 or more. But that's just the statute of frauds. Remember, the UCC applies to the sale of goods, period. Please don't forget that ever again. Okay, so, all right. So that's one big rule. The other thing that you need to understand is that the UCC carves out specific rules when one or both of the parties are merchants. Now, what is a merchant? Well, I've thrown this picture up for you of this guy. At the beginning of the semester when I was growing a mustache, I thought I could be this guy someday. But the honor code apparently tells me I can't have like whatever this dude is doing. So I've pulled it back a little bit. But this is a merchant of something. And if I asked you, like what is this guy a merchant of? I think you could figure it out fairly quickly. This guy sells hats, right? And these are cool looking hats, and he's got a pocket watch, and this is a classy man that sells hats. Hence, this is a merchant of hats. Now, the definition of what a merchant is can get interesting. It's these three things right here on this slide. A person who deals in the goods of the kind involved, this guy, hats. A person who, I love this one. This is like you could almost be a faker and still be a merchant. A person who by occupation holds himself out as having special knowledge or skill relating to the practices or goods involved. So this has all kinds of implications. But again, once you hold yourself out as having specific knowledge of a certain thing, well, you're considered a merchant, even if you don't have it. Why? Because you held yourself out by your occupation, etc. And then the third one, let's not worry this too much. But if you hire a merchant to purchase something for you, this gets into the agency relationship, and we'll get to this at the end of next week. Wait.
Do we need to know all three for the test?
Well, you need to know everything. But what do you mean for the test? Okay. Sorry. All I heard is, do I need to know this for the test?
Sorry. I was on mute. So do we need to know that a merchant is just someone who sells goods, or do we need to know like all three definitions?
So you kind of need to know all three, but it's simple. But three, I think, is the least important. I wouldn't really worry about that right now because we're going to get to agency in a couple weeks. But really, it's just you're a merchant if you sell the thing. That's what I really want you to know. Or if you pretend like you, or you hold yourself out. That's another way, the correct way of saying it. If you hold yourself out as selling the thing, then you're a merchant of that thing, otherwise known as the goods. All right, that's really all you really need to know there. All right, so
Brother Hills, quick question: Would like an auto mechanic technically be considered a merchant, even though they deal in services and not goods?
all right, so great question. Do auto mechanics sell goods as well as services? And the answer is usually yes. Like when you go in to get a repair and they say, well, you're going to need a new alternator, whatever the item is, the good is, well, they sell that as well. So the answer is yes. Even though they're selling services, and services may be the primary thing, they also sell goods, the parts, hence they are merchants of car parts. So yeah, great question, Daniel.
Thanks.
All right. So on this slide, we've got the formation of a sales contract. Really what this means is that in the UCC, sometimes somebody will get out of a contract on a technicality. Why? That there was some defect in the offer or the acceptance, right? That's the primary thing that we look for. That's the defect in the contract formation. The UCC says, let's stop that nonsense. If we can tell that the parties wanted to enter into a contract, then we're going to hold them to the contract, even if there may have been some defect in the acceptance or the offer, whatever the case may be. Like if we can tell that they wanted to enter into a contract, let's push the contract through. And this goes back to the underlying philosophy of the UCC, which is let's get contracts moving rather than using all of these silly technicalities that we inherited from, Europe 500 years ago. Let's start pushing contracts through. Let's make this happen, basically. And yes, this is an American invention, the UCC. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of the exceptions that the UCC creates in the sale of goods that are different than what you learned 2 weeks ago when we first started talking about offer. All right, so here, common law, that's general contract law. That's what common law means. All right, the offer must be definite enough for the parties to ascertain the essential terms. All right, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Here, now remember, K stands for contract. I can't remember if I told you. I think I did. I know contract starts with a C. Sue me, all right? Like, I don't get why we did this, but the capital K just stands for a contract. Okay, so a contract will not fail even if one or more terms are left open, meaning undefined or indefinite, so long as both of the following are true. Okay, so remember, this is where things get nuts, and this is why accountants hate me. We've got general contract law. That's the general law. The UCC carves out exceptions to that. All right, and this is one of those first exceptions. Maybe all the terms aren't definite, but under the UCC, we're gonna push this contract through. Remember, in a sale of goods, and we're gonna need both of these things to be true. So this is the exception under the UCC, but you'll notice later we're gonna get to exceptions to this exception. This is why my exams are open book, by the way. It's very difficult to memorize all of this. And in the real world, you don't have to memorize it anyway. You can always go look it up. And so that's why I give these slides to you as well. All right, as well as the recordings of the lectures. But okay, so number one, we kind of know this one already. The parties intended to make a contract. We have to be able to figure out that the parties wanted to enter into a contract. How do we prove this? Well, we've got an agreement, it's screwed up in some way, it's defective in some way, and yet we can tell that they wanted to enter into a contract. Just look at the whole body of work that you've got in front of you, the whole circumstances. All right, number two, there's a reasonably certain basis for the court to grant an appropriate remedy. What this means is we can't just be like making up terms later. So let's say that you and I enter into a contract to buy my iPad, right? Sale of goods, you betcha. I'm touching it and I'm moving it at the same time. But maybe we forget to do something funny like the price term. Like we agree to that you're going to buy my iPad, but we forget to put in the price. Well, under general contract law, no way. This is an invalid contract and no contract exists. But under the UCC, they're going to say, well, can we figure out an accurate price for this? And the answer is, yeah, people sell their iPads all the time. Let's figure out what the fair market value is for an iPad and make you, in this case, buy Brother Hales' iPad for that fair market value. Now, what we can't do, like maybe we say, hey, I'm going to sell you a lot of iPads. And you say, I accept. Well, yeah, we could figure out the fair market value for an iPad, but we never came up with a quantity. Like I may have been thinking 10 and you may have been thinking 1,000. How is the court going to figure that out? Well, they're not. Like that's not definite enough even under the UCC. So we're going to say invalid contract there. That's this last line. The quantity of goods must be expressly stated in the contract. But the price, we can always figure that out. If it's just one iPad, well, make the other party, in this case you, pay a fair market price for that iPad. All right, so again, the quantity has to be there. But then, as you see here, we've got some exceptions too. This gets so fun.
Brother
If
Hills,
you
I have a quick
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So if it's a sale of goods, do we automatically just like throw general contract laws out and just look at the UCC, or like are they mixed sometime? Like what's the rule on when to use which?
Yeah, so for that, kind of really the guiding thing to look at is this slide right here. Even if it's the sale of good, I'd say 80, 90% of the time, you're still going to use general contract law. But there may be an exception. And so that's what I'm going over right today is just the exceptions to general contract law that the UCC creates. So yeah, good overarching question. I appreciate that. All right, so again, under general, well, I should say this. There's no quantity term in the contract. Well, even under the UCC, we're going to say, yeah, that's probably not going to work unless it fits into one of these exceptions to the exception to the exception. Sorry, go back to the slides. But let's say you enter into a contract with an open quantity term. All right, so here you're going to buy iPads from me. Let's start off and say you're going to buy a lot of iPads from me. Do we have a contract? No way. Like not even under the UCC. Who knows what a lot of iPads even means? And so you're right. Like, well, I'm helping you be right. No contract under general contract law or under the UCC. Doesn't matter. But here we've got a requirement contract, right? So the buyer agrees to buy all or up to a stated amount of what the buyer requires. So this is the exception to the exception to the exception. You say, I'm going to buy, Brother Hales, I sell iPads at my store. We now have a contract that I'm going to supply you iPads that you're going to therefore resell at your store or door to door or whatever it is. And the contract just says, you will give me all of the iPads that I need. Okay, well, you can see why that's just a little different than talking about a lot of iPads. If I know that you sell iPads door to door, do you think I can kind of figure out more or less how many iPads you're going to need? On average, yes. Like, I know that if you're selling iPads door to door, you may sell one here, one there. I can figure out, basically, is what I'm saying, how many iPads you're going to need. So if you say, I want to buy all of the iPads that I require as a door-to-door salesperson, then that is a valid contract. the rationale is we can figure it out more or less. Okay, so that's one exception.
Brother Hills,
Yeah.
got a question about open price terms. So the reasonable price, is that based on the fair value market?
Yep. Yeah, that's the fair market value price.
But what if like it's a good that a company has developed and there's no other companies that develop that product?
Yeah. So if you can't figure out fair market value, then this doesn't work. And courts will probably say there's no contract. Fair market value requires that an average buyer and an average seller of this product exist somewhere in a similar market. So yeah, if you can't figure out fair market value, scratch this. It's not a valid contract under the UCC. And this second bullet point, just to make sure that we hit that too, open payment term, that just means when are you going to pay for it? Well, if it's not in the contract, the UCC says pay for it when it's delivered. That's it. But this open quantity terms, this is the crazy stuff. Like we could not even establish how many iPads you're going to buy from me, but still have a contract if we could reasonably figure out how many iPads, like what the quantity is. And one of those is through these requirement contracts. The other is the output contract. This is pretty fun. Like if I grow tomatoes and I've got my garden, and you come over and you say, I want to buy all of your tomatoes. Have we established a quantity? Not exactly, not specifically, but once you say, I want to buy all of your tomatoes, man, that's a contract. Like, and this implies that you know the square footage or acreage of my tomato farm / garden. Okay, so again, if you say, I want to buy everything that you produce this year, that's going to be valid, even though the quantity term is up in the air. Once you use that language, the UCC says contract, whereas general contract law would say, no, like we don't have a specific quantity here. All right. So anyway, that's kind of fun stuff.
So Brother Hills,
yeah.
Would most of these, like a lot of other legal disputes, just wind up being settled outside, like in realizing that nobody set a price? Like they'd probably go back and be like, oh, hey, we never set a price. How does $100 sound? Or something like that. Would that generally be the way that these get handled?
Yeah, absolutely. 99% of the time, they're just going to negotiate it themselves. Now, there are a number of cases, and the one that you read on Friday for next class, I mean, that's one of the classic UCC dispute cases. And so, yeah, it does end up in court, but that's usually when somebody's just trying to get out of it. All right. So, yeah. Good.
So like when they do say something big, like I'll buy all of this, and they of it.
Yep, exactly. Other questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
on the requirement contract, what if the seller like runs out of product because it's saying like the buyer agrees to like.
Oh, sorry, you accidentally put yourself back on mute.
Sorry, the buyer or the seller agrees that he'll sell anything that the buyer needs.
Yeah.
Oh, then what if the seller just like runs out because the buyer needed a lot more than he thought?
Yeah, then the seller breached, potentially. Now, it could be that the buyer wanted an unreasonable amount more than usual, and there are those defenses. But yeah, under what you get, like the circumstance that you gave me, it sounds like probably that seller breached because they were supposed to supply everything that the other party needed. All right. Okay, good. This slide right here is another exception. We call this the merchant firm offer. As you might imagine, it requires that one of the parties be a merchant, and this you know from the last exam. I think it was the Mickey Bar ice cream. Oh no, maybe you haven't gotten to that one yet. Anyway, an offer can be pulled back before it's accepted, and you learned that in the last unit. Now that's not true if the party offer, if a merchant, so again, one of the parties to the transaction has to be a merchant and has to say, my offer, I'm going to give you this offer and I'm going to hold it open for you. All right, normally that wouldn't fly, but if it's the sale of goods and the person saying that is a merchant, then that merchant who gave that offer has to hold that offer open. Can't sell the goods to somebody else. So let's make an example of this. Let's say that you're going to come buy from me. Like I'm going to be a merchant of European sports cars. All right, so I've got my Aston Martin dealership in Rexburg, Idaho, making lots of money selling Aston Martins in Eastern Idaho. And you come to me to buy an Aston Martin, and I say, you know what, for you, normally I don't do this, but for you, I'm going to hold this offer open. I'm going to sell you this Aston Martin. Normally it sells for $250, but for you, I'll sell it to you for $200. I'm going to leave this offer open for you. And there's a signed writing, meaning I either write it out on a piece of paper or a text. You know what signed writing means now. It can be an email, it can be a text from my number. All of that's going to count. All right. And I'm going to hold this open for you for 1 week. And then you leave and somebody else comes and says, I'd like to buy that Aston Martin for $250,000. And I say, cool. And I totally forget about you. And I sell the Aston Martin to somebody else. Well, under general contract law, an offer to keep it open doesn't really matter. But if I'm a merchant selling goods and I give you a signed writing, then in that case, turn my light on again. In that case, I can be sued for breach of contract. And so anyway, this is the exception. Again, the party saying that they're going to hold it open has to be a merchant, and it doesn't have to be the seller. It could be the buyer. We'll do a top hat question about this in a second as well. But that's the merchant firm offer rule. So let's do some examples in a bit, and then that makes sense. Yeah.
In order to this to be fulfilled, no matter what, we need to have like an email, text, or something like confirming that we can demonstrate that there was a contract, right?
That's right. A signed writing, which basically just means evidence.
Okay.
Yep. Good job. All right, so that's the way that offer is changed under the UCC. Now we'll talk about how acceptance is changed in the UCC. And for this, acceptance, this confuses students at first, but acceptance can be weird under the UCC. You can always accept, like express, implied, whatever, or you could just promise to ship something. So if I say, I would like to buy from you 100 tomatoes for $100, let's say. Well, your acceptance could be they ship out tonight. That's your acceptance. That kind of makes sense. That's almost like an implied acceptance. But it could also be, and this is weird, I could tell you, I would like to buy 100 tomatoes from you for $100. You don't say anything to me. You just ship them. That's also acceptance. And you're like, what the heck? Like, don't you have to communicate an acceptance? And the UCC says, no, if you ship them, that's acceptance. Now, what's really weird is that you could ship me 100 tomatoes and that's acceptance. Why? Because it fits, right?
Well,
you could also
Brother Hales, wouldn't that be basically like a unilateral contract? Like your just acceptance is through action.
Yep.
So they're essentially just changing it to be unilateral.
That's a great way to look at it. It's just kind of like I'm fulfilling it, even though I'm not communicating my acceptance. I'm just shipping them. That works. Now what's really going to blow your mind is that you can also accept my offer by sending me 100 pumpkins or Star Wars dolls or computers or cantaloupe. Like you can accept by the prompt or current shipment of non-conforming goods, meaning not what I asked for. Okay. Now that doesn't make sense. You're like, what the heck is going on? Again, like we got weird rules from England.
Like freebies? Is that what you mean?
Kind of, but yeah, this is the weird American rules that we just invented, right? Shipping non-conforming goods is an acceptance, but at the same time that you accepted, you also breached. All right, so that's what this next slide is kind of helping to cement in your mind. When you shipped me 100 cantaloupe instead of 100 tomatoes, you accepted, but you breached. Now it could be an accommodation, right? So, and that's all that this question is. So basically saying the same thing. If you told me beforehand, you said, Brother Hales, I don't have 100 tomatoes, but I'm shipping you 100 cantaloupe. Well, that's not necessarily a breach because it's kind of a counter offer. It's like, I know you wanted tomatoes, but once you try these cantaloupe, you'll never want to have tomatoes again or something. That's not a breach. But if you don't communicate it at all, you just ship me 100 cantaloupe, well, that's a breach. And I'm going to hold you to that. And you're going to have to pay for the shipment back or to find me another 100 tomatoes, etc. Remember, the purpose of the UCC is to push contracts along. So rather than say that no contract exists, the UCC says, let's just count it as an acceptance, hence a valid contract, and a concurrent or simultaneous breach. All right, and again, we're gonna call it a contract and a breach at the same time. And we'll do a top hat question in a second about Coke, which is why this picture is there. All right.
I had a question actually too.
Yeah.
Because I know with shipment, especially because I am an accounting student, sorry.
All right. I forgive you.
Because I know shipping can actually be a bit trickier, especially because who paid for shipping? Because I know a company pays for shipping or it's considered free shipping. It's technically theirs until it gets to the customer.
Yeah. So I'm going to pause on that because we get to the shipping contracts on Friday. And those of you that are accounting majors, it's going to be a review. So this is when we'll get into the FOB codes or different shipping terms. But yeah, just in general, without even knowing that, once it's shipped, and without talking about risk of loss, it just means it's shipped and it's a breach at the same time. So yeah, we'll do the top hat questions here in a bit. And by the way, it is almost 12:30, so you can jump off. I am recording this. I'll get it back on, or I'll upload it to YouTube here today, but just know you can jump off if you need to go to another class. And I know I promised never to do this again. All right, let me just get through the UCC real quick here. So now, all right, so we've talked about offer acceptance and merchant firm offer rules and acceptance and concurrent breach and all of that. But now let's talk about additional terms, meaning let's say that I tell you I want 100 tomatoes at $100 and you respond back with something different. Maybe it's I'll give you 102 tomatoes for $110. Like you change or you add additional terms. And a good way to think of this is I say I want 100 tomatoes at $100 and you respond back and say that works, and then you add something. You will also you also agree that you'll only buy tomatoes from us for the next year, right? You just add an additional term when you're accepting my offer. Well, under what you learned the last 2 weeks, that's not a contract. It's a new counteroffer. But under the UCC, that may not be the case. We don't use the mirror image rule anymore if we've got the sale of goods. If the UCC applies. All right, sorry. So what we now do is we look at these additional things, and on the exam, I want you just to come back to these slides. It'll make it so much easier. So let's, and here, whether these additional terms are going to become part of the contract depends on who's a merchant. All right, so that's why we introduced the merchant stuff earlier. All right, so when one or both parties are not merchants, this is important. So yeah, there's either no merchants involved or there's one merchant. Then, all right, kind of nuts here. You still have a contract, but it's formed according to the terms of the original offer. Okay, and we just pretend like those additional terms never even happened. Like we just ignore them. There's a contract, but whatever those additional terms are, like I would exclusively buy tomatoes from you or whatever it was, we'll just ignore it. There's a contract just for that one under the original terms of the offer, 100 tomatoes for $100. All right, again, this is when one or both of the parties are non-merchants. All right, the next one is going to be both parties are merchants. If both parties are merchants, then those additional terms may come in. Okay, so this is an exception to exception to an exception. What this means is those additional terms automatically become part of the contract unless one of these other things happen. So maybe my offer said, by the way, I'm going to buy 100 tomatoes for $100. Don't try to add anything in, John, or something like that's it, John. Don't add additional terms. If you do, the offer's off. Well, obviously, then those additional terms aren't coming in. Number two, this is the tough one. The new terms materially alter the contract. So again, what does material mean? It means substantial. It means more than a little. So if I send in my offer 100 tomatoes for $100 and you respond back, I accept, and you're only going to buy tomatoes from me for the next year. Do you think that materially alters the contract? Yeah, definitely. That's like an exclusive arrangement between us, and that like, remember, our agreement was just for 100 tomatoes for $100. Like adding on all this extra stuff like exclusivity, that's a big change. That's a big deal. Think of it like dating. Like, hey, do you want to go out? Yes, but only if we only date for the rest of our lives forever. That's a big deal. Hence, not part of the contract. All right, not that dating is, well, dating can be a contract. I forget, you're all in the middle of, well, some of you are dating, sorry. Or congratulations, it can be fun. All right, what am I talking about? This isn't a marriage prep class, although I do try to make it a marriage prep class every once in a while. All right, the third one is the offeror objects to the new or changed terms within a reasonable time. So if you respond back with a term, like let's use a non-material term, 100 tomatoes for $100. You respond, I accept. And as part of the terms, they'll be there on Tuesday, right? That may not change it at all. Like I was expecting it on Tuesday or Wednesday anyway. So you added this additional term of being here by Wednesday. Well, that comes into the contract because it doesn't materially alter anything. It's not a big deal. That's another way to look at this. It's not a big deal. Now, because it's not a big deal, it becomes part of the contract unless number 3 says, I say, no, I don't like that or something. All right, then it's not part of the contract. All right, so now you've got all the reasons that we've blown up the mirror image rule in the United States using the UCC. Now this case, Mahendra versus National Gold, I love because it demonstrates this very well. Mahendra was a company in New York City. They sold diamonds. They were the wholesaler. National Gold was a retailer in California. They would buy their diamonds from Mahendra, and then National Gold would sell them to consumers in California. And what's interesting about this case is that it's going to turn, everything changes based on the UCC. So National Gold, the way that it would work is National Gold would say, hey, Mahendra, we want to buy diamonds from you. Mahendra would say, okay, we're going to ship you like thousands of diamonds. And this is apparently normal. So Mahendra would send a box filled with diamonds. Now they were like categorized in little boxes or whatever within the box, but so National Gold would get a big box of diamonds, and they would pick out the diamonds that they wanted, and then they would ship the box back to Mahendra in New York. Mahendra would look at the box and say, okay, they took this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, send them a bill for $20,000. And that's how it worked. So, okay, so you have to understand that the way that this works is the offer, National Gold didn't offer to buy certain diamonds because they didn't know which diamonds they wanted. So they offered to buy diamonds by pulling diamonds out of the box, and they were priced and everything. The offer was them pulling out diamonds and shipping the rest back to Mahendra. Mahendra would accept their offer to buy diamonds by sending an invoice to National Gold. All of this is a little different than the way that we normally transact, but it makes sense. The offer was pulling out diamonds and keeping certain diamonds. The acceptance was Mahendra saying, okay, you can keep those, and here's the invoice for the price of all of that. But on the invoice, Mahendra said, by the way, if there's ever any dispute about our diamonds, you have to sue us in New York. So the question became, is that additional term, the jurisdictional clause, you have to sue us in New York, is that part of the contract? Okay, let's walk through it. Is it an additional term? Yes. Is it a material additional term? Yes. Like having to sue somebody in New York rather than California over a dispute is always going to be a material term, a material additional term, right? And this is important for the exam. Okay. Are they both merchants? Yep. So you come to this slide and you say, does the new, since they're both merchants, does the new or changed term material alter the contract? Yes. So that means that it doesn't become part of the contract. Like read this phrase up here. The terms automatically become part of the contract unless one of the following exists. The new or changed terms materially alter the contract. So that means it doesn't become part of the contract, which means they entered into a contract for the price of diamonds. But Mahendra saying you have to sue us in New York doesn't become part of the contract. Hence, National Gold can sue them in California instead of New York. All right, be very methodical. You accountants should like this. All of this today makes sense. It's listed out in the slides and in the reading. Just kind of follow along and you'll be able to determine whether or not something is coming into the contract or not.
Brother Hales.
Yeah.
The UCC and everything that implies is only for a national commercial contract, right? Because if we're talking about international things, then I guess everything we hold upon like trade agreements that they might have, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. So the UCC, every state has adopted the UCC. And the reason behind this, you probably saw this in the reading, is if you didn't have this, every state was coming up with their own contract law. And there were all kinds of weird exceptions, like Louisiana was basing their stuff off of French law. Every other state was using their own version of British law. Like it got nuts. And all of a sudden, like it slowed trade down between the states. So the UCC exists to make sure that everybody has a standard set of contract law. And that just helps everybody understand what the contract's going to be. And yeah, there's more like philosophical discussions we could go into, but yeah. And when you've got international trade, oftentimes the parties will use UCC law because this is spread to other countries because so many people do business with the US. But it'll be up to trade treaties and the specific contract. The other important thing I should make clear is that the UCC only applies if the contract is silent to these various issues. If the contract says, additional terms will never come into this contract or whatever, then you're just going to use the contract. But if the contract is silent as to anything that we've talked about so far, meaning additional terms, the merchant firm offer, like any of these exceptions, they only exist if the contract is silent. So look to the contract first, but again, if the contract is silent, if it doesn't have anything about additional terms, then you're going to use the UCC. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up that question. Okay, Now we talk about the statute of frauds. And you remember last week I was like, here's all the things that the statute of frauds applies to. And it was like, things that can't be done within a year, transfers of land. And then I'm like, here it says UCC $500 or more. And I said, hey, hold on, we'll talk about that later. Well, it's later. We're going to talk about it now. So here, kind of what remember what the statute of frauds was about. And the statute of frauds is the thing that drives me nuts because it's not a statute and doesn't necessarily deal with fraud. But the statute of fraud says some agreements need to be in writing. And now we're going to add to our list of things that we already talked about, the sale of goods for $500 or more. Now, don't get confused. The UCC applies to the sale of goods, but the statute of frauds will require a writing of the sale of goods priced at $500 or more. All right. Now, when this law was created, $500 was a lot of money. Now it's not. Granted, you're students, so it's a lot of money to you, but it's not the same as it used to be. $500, you buy lots of things for $500 or more. But again, statute of fraud, or the UCC never changed this rule, so it still applies to sale of goods worth $500 or more, which means we need a writing. It doesn't mean we need a contract. It doesn't mean we need a notary. All the same things that I told you last week still apply. We just need proof that there's a contract if there's a sale of goods worth $500 or more. So again, we just need to know that the parties intended to form a contract and it's signed, or we have proof that it was written by the party against whom enforcement is sought, meaning the person that wants to pretend like there wasn't a contract. We just need to have some proof that that party entered into the contract. Okay, so that's the statute of frauds. And then everything that we talked about last week still applies. Like, you just need proof, get a text, get an email, and all the exceptions to the statute of frauds still apply to the UCC. All right, the parole evidence rule. This is the exact same as last week. The parole evidence rule just says when you enter into a contract, you can't dispute it later by talking about what you discussed before you signed the contract. Why? You signed a contract. Like, if it was important to you, then make sure it's in the contract. That's all that this deals with. And this kind of delineates or defines what course of dealing, usage of trade, and course of performance means. That's it for the lecture. Let's see, with the UCC. So I'm going to stop.